Hello, dear aspirants of NET. Welcome to 4Pi Academy. This is Milind Patwardhan, and I am going to discuss with you the course on quantum mechanics. In our very first lecture, we are going to discuss the basic foundations of the quantum mechanics, that is de Broglie's hypothesis, Bohr's postulates and de Broglie's hypothesis, Davison-Germer experiment, properties of matter waves, concept of phase velocity and group velocity, physical significance of wave function psi, and probability density, that is mod of psi square, according to Max Born interpretation. So let us begin with the wave particle duality of radiation. Now you know that there is a notion that our universe is made up of matter and radiation. You know that all the universe is believed to be composed of matter, mostly matter, and the radiation, that is the electromagnetic radiation. And therefore it is essential for us, it is important for us to know the properties of matter as well as the properties of electromagnetic radiation around us. So you know that the smallest particle of matter is called as atom, and therefore it is important for us to know what are the constituents of atom, how it is made up of, and at the same time we should know and explore the properties for the electromagnetic radiation. So if we know what is meant by matter and what is meant by radiation, then we know how the universe is made up of. And therefore radiation was being studied, that is light, you may simply call it as light. And you know that light shows the phenomena such as interference, diffraction, polarization, and so on. So the phenomena of interference is nothing but when two or more light waves superimpose on each other, the resultant light intensity is changed in such a way that intensity becomes maximum at some points and minimum at some other points. Then we say that the interference is constructive wherever intensity is maximum, wherever the intensity is minimum we say that the interference is destructive one, and so on. Then diffraction is again it is nothing but the interference of light waves originating from different parts of the same incident wavefront. Then polarization of light, it proves that light has a transverse wave nature, that is the vibrations of light takes place in a direction which is perpendicular to the direction of propagation. So these physical phenomena, along with this the phenomena such as reflection, refraction, rectilinear propagation, and so on and so forth, these physical phenomena have been studied over a very huge period of time, and all these physical phenomena can be successfully explained by Huygens wave theory of light, and therefore it was believed that light can be explained completely. We know everything about light, but this is not the fact. At the beginning of the 19th century, there were other physical phenomena which is shown by light, such as photoelectric effect, Compton effect, then emission and absorption of radiation by matter, that is the blackbody radiation. And while showing these physical phenomena were not been able to be explained by the classical wave theory of light, and light shows a different kind of a behavior, and that behavior is called as the particle nature of light. Light no more behaves like a wave, but it behaves like a particle or a quanta of energy, or a bundle of or packet of energy having energy which is E is equal to h nu. Further it is known as the Planck's quantum hypothesis, where h is universal constant known as Planck's constant and nu is the frequency of photon. Now if you compare the particle nature and wave nature, then just look at the properties associated with a particle. A particle occupies a well-defined position in space, that is, a particle is localized in space, for example a grain of sand, a cricket ball, etc. While if you look at a wave, what is meant by wave? A wave is a spread out disturbance in space. For example, on throwing a stone in a pond of water, the waves start moving out in concentric circles. Similarly, the sound produced by a speaker reaches to everybody in the audience, hence a wave is highly non-localized in nature. So wave is basically a spread out disturbance and it is completely non-localized, while if you look at the particle, then particle is a highly localized thing. Then when a particular space is occupied by a particle, the same space cannot be occupied by other particle. In other words, particles do not interfere. While two or more waves can coexist in the same region of space and hence they interfere. Then a matter particle is identified by the properties such as mass, momentum, kinetic energy, spin, electric charge, etc. While if you look at a wave is identified by properties such as wavelength, frequency, amplitude, intensity, energy, etc. Now if you just compare the particle aspects and the wave aspects which are associated with a wave or a particle, they seem to be such that they are not at all related together. A particle is highly localized, a wave is non-localized. Particles cannot interfere, waves can interfere. Then if you look at the properties such as mass, a wave do not have the mass, a wave cannot have momentum, wave cannot have electric charge, and so on. If you look at a particle, then particle cannot have frequency, wavelength, amplitude, intensity, and so on. So the physical properties or the two aspects, they seem to be such that they are not at all related together. But this is not true. So as discussed earlier, the photoelectric effect. This photoelectric effect, when ultraviolet light is incident on a metal plate in a vacuum, it emits charged particles, Hertz observed this effect in 1887, which were later shown to be electrons. Those charged particles were later shown to be electrons by J.J. Thomson in 1899. Now what this experiment is all about, there is a metal plate usually made up of zinc, which is subjected to positive potential of the battery, and there is a collecting plate which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery, and there is a vacuum chamber inside it. Now when light is incident onto this metal plate, it ejects out the electrons. So these electrons are collected by the collecting plate, and it completes the circuit, and then we say that the photocurrent flows in the circuit. Now at that time no particle behavior was observed, and therefore only the laws of classical physics were there, and by applying the laws of classical expectations, when the electric field E of light, it exerts a force F, which is minus E into E, capital E, whereas this small e is the charge of the electrons. So this is the amount of force which is exerted on the electrons. Now as the intensity of light increases, this force also increases. So kinetic energy of ejected electrons, it should increase if the intensity is increased. Then electrons should be emitted whatever the frequency nu of the light, so long as E is sufficiently large. For very low intensities, we expect a time lag between the light exposure and emission, while electrons absorb energy, enough energy to escape from the material. So these were the expectations of classical physics, but this photoelectric effect do not show any of these expectations of the classical physics. While the actual results speaks that the maximum kinetic energy of ejected electrons is independent of the intensity, on the other hand, it depends on the frequency of the incident light. Then for frequency nu less than nu 0 or nu naught, it is also called as a threshold frequency or cutoff frequency. So for nu less than nu 0, that is for frequencies below a cutoff frequency, no electrons are emitted. Then there is no time lag. However, the rate of ejection of electrons depends on light intensity, but there is no time lag. As soon as the light is incident, immediately the electrons are ejected from the metal plate. And therefore these are the actual results which classical physics, this classical theory of light, it cannot explain, or the wave theory of light could not explain these actual results. Then the maximum kinetic energy of the emitted electron, according to Einstein. So Einstein gave the interpretation in the year 1905 that light comes in packets of energy called as photons, having energy E is equal to h nu, where this h is the Planck's constant and nu is the frequency of photon. An electron absorbs a single photon to leave the material. Then Einstein have given this equation that the maximum kinetic energy of an emitted electron is then K max is equal to h nu minus w, where this h is the universal constant. It is 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 joule second, that is the Planck's constant, and here this w is the work function. So that is the minimum energy needed for the electron to escape from the metal, and it depends on material. So for different materials this work function is w is different, but usually this work function is it is in between 2 to 5 electron volt. Then this photoelectric effect has been verified by another scientist, Millikan. So he verified in detail through subsequent experiments and confirmed that the light wave theory of light cannot explain this physical phenomena, but only the quantum behavior or the particle behavior of light can explain this behavior. Then there is another physical phenomena, that is the Compton scattering. So Compton in 1923 measured the intensity of scattered X-rays from solid target as function of wavelength for different angles. He won the 1927 Nobel Prize. What his experiment is all about? So there is an X-ray source, and when this X-ray source is incident on the target, he observed the scattered X-rays from the target, and what he observed is that he measured the wavelength of the scattered radiation, and his result shows that there is a peak in the scattered radiation which shifts to longer wavelength than the source. The amount, it depends on the theta, but not on the target material. Now what is there about the classical picture? So the classical physics says that the oscillating electromagnetic field, it causes the oscillations in positions of charged particles which re-radiate in all directions at the same frequency and wavelength as that of the incident radiation. Means if there is an incident light wave which is incident on a charged particle, then the oscillation of this electron will take place, and again it will emit back the same radiation without change. That is, whatever be the frequency and wavelength of the incident light wave is there, the emitted light wave also should have the same wavelength and frequency. But Compton, on the other hand, observed the billiard ball collision between the particles of light, that is X-ray photons, and the electrons in the material. So here this is the incoming photon. When this incoming photon is incident on the electron, so after collision the electron recoils in the other direction, and the photon is scattered in the other direction. So here this collision is something like the billiard ball collision. So incoming photon strikes the electron, the photon gets scattered in other direction, and the electron also gets recoiled, and therefore this collision is something like the billiard ball collision, for which we can apply the principle of conservation of energy and conservation of momentum. So by applying the conservation of energy, we have the incoming photon having energy which is h nu plus mec square, which is equal to h nu dash plus pe square c square plus me square c raised to power 4 raised to half. So this is the energy of photon as well as the electron after scattering, and this is the energy of the incoming photon before collision, and this is about the conservation of momentum. So this principle of conservation of energy and conservation of momentum, this is the property of a particle, not the property of a wave. From this, Compton derived the change in wavelength, that lambda dash minus lambda, which is equal to h upon mec into 1 minus cos theta, which is equal to this h upon me into c. All these are constants, where h is Planck's constant, m is mass of the electron, and c is the velocity of light. So we replace this by lambda c into 1 minus cos theta. So this lambda c is known as the Compton wavelength, and its value is about 2.4 into 10 raised to power minus 12 meter. So this lambda dash minus lambda is known as Compton shift, that is, or change in wavelength, and it is always greater than 0. So in summary of photon properties, relation between particle and wave, properties of light, energy and frequency, they are related by an equation, that is E is equal to h nu. Also have relation between momentum and wavelength. Then the relativistic formula relating energy and momentum is E square is equal to P square C square plus M square C raised to power 4. For light, energy E is equal to P into C, where P is the momentum and C is the velocity, and C is equal to nu into lambda, that is velocity of light is equal to frequency multiplied by wavelength. So momentum P can be written as h upon lambda, which is equal to h into nu by c. Also commonly we can write these as E is equal to h cross omega, P is equal to h cross k, then angular frequency omega can be written as 2 pi nu, then the wave vector k can be written as 2 pi by lambda, then h bar, that is h cross, is h upon 2 pi. So these are the things which we are going to require later, and we will discuss this from the time to time. Okay, so up to now we know that light behaves like a wave, as well as light behaves like particle. So while explaining the interference, diffraction and polarization, we require that light should behave like a wave. While explaining the photoelectric effect, Compton effect and blackbody radiation, we require that light should behave like a particle, and that particle of light is called as photon. And then the wave particle duality for light has been accepted universally. So you can imagine that these are the two sides of a single coin. So only one, when you toss a coin, only one side appears to you. It doesn't mean that the other side is not present, but only one side appears to you at one instant of time. It means that when you observe the interference of light, you cannot explain interference by assuming the particle nature. You cannot explain the polarization of light by assuming the particle nature. At the same time, you cannot explain the photoelectric effect by using the wave nature, and so on. So, so this has been observed that for radiation, it behaves like a dual, having the dual nature. Then later came the scientist whose name was Louis de Broglie, and there is a very interesting story about this scientist. This Louis de Broglie, he did his masters in history, and he was the Duke of Paris. He was the son of Duke of Paris, and therefore he was very rich. And at that time, Einstein was very famous, and Einstein gave the theory of relativity, that is the special theory of relativity, and he was been invited around the world in order to deliver the lectures on special theory of relativity. So Louis de Broglie developed the interest in physics, so he started reading books of physics. Then later he decided to do the masters in physics and PhD in physics. So he did the PhD in physics, and then he came to the conclusion, he made a very bold statement that if light can act as a wave sometimes, and like a particle at other times, then all matter usually thought of as a particles, they should exhibit the wave-like behavior. So this is a very bold statement made by the de Broglie hypothesis, and he made this bold statement on a very basic fact that nature loves symmetry. It is itself in the nature that nature loves symmetry, and if our nature in the universe, in the nature itself, if most of the universe is made up of matter and radiation, then if one of the counterpart, that is the radiation, if it can behave like a wave as well as particle, then the other counterpart, that is matter, which is basically having the particle nature, it should also behave like a wave. This was his argument, because nature loves symmetry, and therefore Louis de Broglie, he extended the wave-particle duality of light to the material particles. So if a light wave can show the wave-particle duality in some conditions, then particles such as electrons, they should also act as waves at some times. This is known as the de Broglie's hypothesis. Thus, according to de Broglie's hypothesis, a moving particle always has a wave associated with it, and the motion of that particle is guided by the associated wave. The waves associated with the particle, they are known as the matter waves, or they are also known as de Broglie waves. If a particle of mass m is moving with velocity v, the wavelength lambda of matter waves associated with a particle is inversely proportional to the momentum and is given by lambda is equal to h upon p or h upon mv. Now if you look at this equation very carefully, then on the left hand side of this equation there is a term that is lambda, that is wavelength, while on the right hand side this h is just a Planck's constant, and this p is momentum. If you look at this equation very carefully, then the left hand side of this equation represents the wave nature, while on the other hand the right hand side of this equation, it represents the momentum, which is the particle nature. It means that this equation lambda is equal to h upon p, this equation, it relates the wave and particle aspect together. So the relation between the momentum and the wavelength of a photon, it can also be applied to the material particles also. This was his argument. So as a photon travels with velocity c, that is photon is the particle of light, so it can travel with the velocity of light, its momentum can be expressed as p is equal to E by c. So this can be written as according to Planck's quantum hypothesis, energy can be written as E is equal to h nu. So this will be h nu upon c, which is equal to this nu by c is nothing but c by nu is lambda, and therefore this can be written as lambda h upon lambda. Thus the wavelength of photon, we can write down this equation in terms of wavelength, that is lambda is equal to h upon p. Now how he come to this equation? As I told you earlier that he was fond of Einstein, so Einstein gave the relation which is E is equal to mc square, that is called as the famous mass energy relation, and according to Planck's quantum hypothesis, E is equal to h nu, he simply equated these two equations. So by equating these two equations, he come to the conclusion that lambda is equal to h upon m, lambda is equal to h upon p, where p is the momentum of the photon. So as this equation is true, or this equation can be true, according to his hypothesis that nature loves symmetry, so if particles can also behave like a wave, then if a particle of mass m is moving with velocity v and has momentum which is p is equal to mv, then thus the wavelength associated thus the wavelength of de Broglie wave associated with it, it can also be written as lambda is equal to h upon p, which is equal to h upon mv. So thus the waves associated with a moving particle, they are called as the matter waves, or they are called as de Broglie waves. So this is the de Broglie wavelength. So on the left hand side we have the wavelength, that is the wave property, and on the right hand side we have the momentum, which is the particle property. Then de Broglie wavelength in terms of kinetic energy of the particle. So consider a particle of mass m moving with velocity v. Its momentum p is equal to mv, and the de Broglie wavelength of matter waves associated with it is given by lambda is equal to h upon p, which is equal to h upon mv. The kinetic energy of the particle can be written as E is equal to half mv square, which can be written as m square v square upon twice m. So mass into velocity is momentum, and therefore m square v square can be written as p square upon twice m. So writing this equation in terms of p square, we get p square is equal to twice me. So p is equal to square root of twice me. Hence, putting the value of p in the equation of matter waves, we get lambda is equal to h upon p, which is h upon square root of twice m into E, where this h is Planck's constant, m is mass of the particle, and this capital E is the kinetic energy of the particle. So the above equation gives the de Broglie wavelength of particle of mass m, kinetic energy E. So this is the equation which is true for any particle irrespective of its charge or mass. This is very important. This equation is independent of charge of the particle. Then de Broglie wavelength of an electron or proton accelerated by a potential difference. So let us consider that there is that if a charged particle such as electron or proton of rest mass m0 is accelerated by a potential difference of capital V volts, then the kinetic energy is gained by it is given by the electrical energy, which is E into capital V, where E is charge of the electron, charge of the particle, and capital V is the potential to which it is subjected. So this electrical energy will provide necessary kinetic energy for the motion of electron. So we'll get half m0 v square is equal to EV. So again, writing this equation as m0 square v square upon twice m0, which is equal to EV. So m0 square v square is equal to twice m0 EV, or m0 v is equal to square root of twice m0 EV. So this m0 v is nothing but momentum, and therefore we can write the de Broglie wavelength associated with a charged particle as lambda is equal to h upon p, which is h upon m0 v. So from equations 2 and 3 we get lambda is equal to h upon square root of twice m0 EV, where this h is Planck's constant. It is 6.63 into 10 raised to power minus 34 joules second. E is charge of the electron, which is 1.6 into 10 raised to power minus 19 coulombs. So for electron, as the rest mass of electron, that is m0e, is 9.1 into 10 raised to power minus 31 kg. So if I substitute the values of h, e and m, that is for electron, which is 9.1 into 10 raised to power minus 31 kg in this equation, then I will get the wavelength associated with the electron, which is subjected to potential difference of V volts, as lambda is equal to 12.26 angstrom units divided by root of V. Angstrom unit means 10 raised to minus 10 meters. Then for a proton, the rest mass of the proton is 1.673 into 10 raised to minus 27 kg. So if I replace these values, that is h, if I put the values of h, e and m as mass of proton, then I get the final equation for the wavelength of proton as 0.286 angstrom unit divided by root of V. So if you remember these two formulas, that is they are very simple formulas, and the question can be framed on these two formulas, that if an electron is subjected to so and so potential difference of so and so volts, then calculate the de Broglie wavelength associated with such electron. Or if a proton is accelerated by so and so potential difference, then calculate what is the de Broglie wavelength associated with the proton, and so on. So such type of questions can be framed, which are very simple. Then properties of matter waves. So according to de Broglie's hypothesis, for a particle of mass m moving with velocity v, the wavelength of matter wave associated with it is given by lambda is equal to h upon p or h upon mv, where h is Planck's constant. The properties of matter waves can be summarized as below. That is, wavelength is inversely proportional to the velocity of the particle. So the wavelength of matter waves is inversely proportional to the velocity of particle, that is lambda is inversely proportional to v. Thus, when a particle is at rest, the velocity is 0, and if velocity is 0, then the wavelength becomes infinite, because 1 upon 0 is infinity. Smaller is the value of v, longer is the wavelength of the matter waves associated with it. It means that the matter waves are detectable only for moving particles. Then second, wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle. So since the de Broglie wavelength is inversely proportional to the mass of the particle, so lighter the particle, smaller is the value of m, that is smaller is the value of m, and hence longer is the wavelength of the matter waves associated with it. Therefore, the wave behavior of microparticles will be significant, whereas the waves associated with macro bodies can never be detected. Then matter waves are related with the probability of finding the particle. If a photon is considered as a particle, then corresponding electromagnetic wave is a de Broglie wave for that photon. Similarly, atomic particles are associated with matter waves which do not have similarity to any known waves such as electromagnetic or sound waves. De Broglie waves are associated with locating the probability of particle and hence also known as probability waves. Matter waves are not electromagnetic waves. Any type of waves are produced by oscillations of certain quantity. When a charged particle oscillates, it produces electromagnetic waves. Matter waves are produced by the motion of the particles and do not depend on the charge of particle. Therefore, matter waves are not electromagnetic waves, and therefore matter waves are associated with not only charged particles such as protons, electrons, but the matter waves, they are also associated with the neutral particles such as neutron. Then matter waves are not mechanical waves. Mechanical waves such as sound waves are produced by vibrations of particles of the medium through which they travel. A particle can always travel in vacuum, and hence matter waves are associated with it even in vacuum. So the matter waves do not require any medium for propagation. They are not mechanical waves. So these are the properties of matter waves. Now let us look at the matter aspect of the universe. So as I told you that our universe is largely made up of matter and radiation. So we know about radiation, that is electromagnetic radiation or light, that it has the dual nature. It behaves sometimes as a particle, sometimes as a wave. The other counterpart is the matter, and the smallest particle of matter is called as atom, and therefore it is also essential for us to know what are the constituents of an atom is, what it is composed of, and therefore different atomic models were put forward over a very huge period of time. The first atomic model was proposed by Thomson, which is known as the Thomson's plum pudding model, which has been discarded because it cannot prove many of the properties associated with the atom. Then later came the Rutherford. Rutherford was an experimental physicist, so he performed the experiment of scattering of alpha particles through a thin foil of gold, and he observed that the whole mass of the atom is concentrated inside the nucleus. And since he observed that the alpha particles, which are the positively charged particles, since they get scattered from the nucleus, it means that the charge on the nucleus, it should be a positive charge. But since atom is found to be electrically neutral, it means that there is an equivalent negative charge which should revolve around the nucleus. So he named the positively charged particles inside the nucleus as protons, and the equivalent negative charge which revolves around the nucleus, that is the electron. But at that time, since there were no concepts of quantum physics have been evolved, and therefore there were only the classical laws of physics which is given by Maxwell's electromagnetic equations. They are the part of the classical physics, and he was applying the laws of classical physics, that is the Maxwell's electromagnetic equation, in order to explain his atomic model. that is also famously known as the planetary model. Like various planets, they rotate about their own axis as well as they rotate about the sun. So it is called as the planetary model. So Bohr was correct in some sense, but at the same time, his atomic model was also missing, in a sense that when he proposed that electron is revolving around the nucleus, then according to Maxwell's electromagnetic equation, since electron is a charged particle, so whenever there is a charged particle which is in motion, then such charged particle should radiate energy continuously. So if this electron radiates energy continuously, and being a negatively charged particle, so after some revolutions this electron would have fallen inside the nucleus. But this doesn't happen, otherwise we would not have observed the stable elements in nature. So this doesn't happen, and therefore something was missing. So later came the Niels Bohr, who was the student of Rutherford, who was also an experimental physicist, and he proposed that forget about putting up a atomic model first. We'll perform some experiments, and then on the basis of those experimental results, we'll try to develop a atomic model or atomic model theory. So he performed this. He studied the spectra of hydrogen atom, and from the spectra of hydrogen atom, he observed that he was successful in explaining the spectra of hydrogen atom completely by using his atomic model, and also awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for that. But for explanation of that hydrogen atom spectra, he need to make three assumptions, and these three assumptions were called as postulates. So his very first postulate is electrons can revolve around the nucleus of an atom in only stationary orbits or permitted orbits, and while revolving in these orbits it cannot radiate any energy. This was his first postulate of stationary orbits. Then his second postulate was the angular momentum of the electron is quantized, that is Fvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. And his third postulate was when electron jumps from one permitted orbit to the other, then only it can radiate any energy. But these three postulates were remain as postulates or assumptions only, because there were no theoretical background for these three postulates. There is no theoretical explanation for these three postulates for a very long period of time. So de Broglie's hypothesis of matter waves, it gives a theoretical justification for these three postulates for the first time, because as per the de Broglie's hypothesis, electron, which is a particle, and when this electron is in motion, there should be a matter wave associated with the particle in motion, and if this matter wave it meets itself in phase, then if the matter wave meets itself in phase, then it forms a stationary wave pattern around the orbit, and such stationary wave pattern is known as the stationary orbit. So when the electron revolves in a such pattern, such that the matter wave meets itself in phase, it produces the stationary wave pattern, and that is called as the stationary orbit. So when the electron revolves in a stationary orbit, it cannot radiate any energy. Then his second postulate was the angular momentum of the electron is quantized, that is Mvr is equal to nh upon 2 pi. So if the wave meets itself in phase, it means that the integral number of wavelengths should fit into the circumference of the orbit, and therefore 2 pi r should be equal to n into lambda, where 2 pi r is the circumference of the orbit and it should fit integral number of wavelengths. So 2 pi r should be equal to n into lambda, where lambda is the de Broglie wavelength. So if we substitute lambda as h upon mv and finally rearrange the term as mvr, where mvr is the angular momentum, then it exactly comes out to be nh upon 2 pi, which exactly matches with the second Bohr postulate, and so is the third. So when electron jumps from one permitted orbit to the other, then only it can radiate any energy. So this de Broglie's hypothesis of matter waves, it gives the theoretical justification for the Bohr's postulates for the first time. Then next is the Davison-Germer experiment. There were two scientists, that is Davison and Germer, because still this is just a hypothesis, de Broglie's hypothesis. There is no experimental evidence for the existence of matter waves in nature. So the two scientists, that is Davison and Germer, they decided to study the scattering of matter wave associated with an electron with the help of single crystals of nickel, because if you look at the de Broglie wavelength associated with an electron subjected to potential difference of say 100 volts, then roughly this de Broglie wavelength comes out to be 1 angstrom minute. So it is in the range of wavelength of X-rays, and since X-rays can be diffracted with the help of single crystal of nickel, and therefore if the matter waves do really exist in nature, they should also be get diffracted or scattered through the single crystal of nickel. So these two scientists, that is Davison and Germer, they decided to perform the scattering of such matter wave, and they observed the fact that when a beam of electrons is subjected onto the single crystal of nickel, so you know that the regular periodic arrangement of atoms, they are known as lattice points, and we can construct various planes called as the Bragg planes, and the interplanar spacing is here represented as small d. So they are the interplanar spacing for the Bragg planes. So since the interatomic spacing in case of nickel is of the order of 1 angstrom minute, which is comparable to the wavelength of that is the de Broglie wavelength associated with electron, then it should get scattered or diffracted. And they exactly observed this, that when a beam of electrons which is accelerated by a potential difference of 54 volt, such beam of electrons is scattered by a maximum angle of 50 degree. So this phi is the scattering angle, and they observed for this angle and this potential which is 54 degree 54 volt accelerating potential and 50 degree scattering angle, they measured the first order diffraction, and they observed that they calculated the de Broglie wavelength by using this formula, which is lambda is equal to h upon square root of twice m ev, or that is 12.26 or 12.27 angstrom minute divided by root of 54. It comes out to be 1.67 angstrom minute, while they calculated the de Broglie wavelength by using the Bragg's law for X-ray diffraction, which is 2d sin theta is equal to n lambda, where d is the interplanar spacing which I told you earlier, and this interplanar spacing in case of nickel is of the order of 0.092 nanometer for the nickel, and the formula is 2 times d, which is 2 into 0.092 nanometer into sine of theta, where theta we need to calculate it as 90 minus scattering angle divided by 2. So it is sine of 90 degree minus 50 degrees the scattering angle divided by 2. And for first order, that is for n is equal to 1, they calculated this this wavelength associated with the electron as 1.65 angstrom minute. So from the theoretical formula, this wavelength comes out to be 1.67 angstrom minute, while from the experimental results it comes out to be 1.65 angstrom minute. Means these two values, they are in very good match with each other. So therefore the experimental results are in close agreement with the theoretical values, which values got from the de Broglie equation, and therefore equations 3 and 4, they verify the de Broglie's equation, and therefore this Davison-Germer experiment, this gives the experimental evidence of the existence of matter waves. So matter waves do really exist in nature. Then phase velocity and group velocity. So as I told you earlier that if there is a particle of mass m which is in motion with velocity v, then you know that there is a matter wave associated with the particle in motion. But if we associate a wave with the particle in motion, then it creates two problems. First problem is, how can a wave which is a spread out disturbance in space can represent a particle which is highly localized thing? And the second question is, if we associate a matter wave with the particle in motion, then what exactly is the thing that is waving in the matter wave? So these are the two questions and which needed to be answered, because we have already discussed at the beginning that if you look at the particle and wave aspect, then particle occupies a well defined position in space, while a wave is a spread out disturbance in space, and therefore a wave is highly non-localized, whereas a particle is a highly localized thing. So if we associate a matter wave with the particle in motion, then where is the exact position of the particle? This is the first question which we need to address. And therefore it was suggested that a monochromatic wave representation of the particle is not sufficient, and hence instead of a single wave, a large number of waves which slightly change in their frequency, as well as that is the angular frequency as well as propagation constant, they should represent the particle in motion. And the superposition of all such waves, it gives rise to an interference pattern or a hump, and this interference pattern or a hump is called as a wave packet. So here you can see that there is a slight change in frequencies, that is the angular frequencies, as well as the propagation constant, and all such group of waves, they are called as the guide waves or probability waves. And when all such waves they superimpose on each other, they gives rise to a resultant interference pattern. And you know that in this interference pattern, wherever the interference is constructive, amplitude will become maximum, and wherever the interference is destructive, the amplitude becomes less or smaller. So we get such type of pattern, it is called as a wave packet. And now to this wave packet, there are two kinds of velocities which are associated with this wave packet. That is the crest and trough inside the wave packet, it moves with a velocity, or the phase with which phase inside the wave packet, it moves with a velocity. That velocity is called as the phase velocity. It is denoted as Vp, and it is defined as omega by k, where omega is angular frequency and k is propagation constant. While as this complete wave packet, it moves with a velocity, and that wave group which is moving with a velocity, or this wave packet, it moves with a velocity, that velocity is called as the group velocity. But this phase velocity is meaningless. Why it is meaningless? Because this phase velocity Vp, as I told you, that it is defined as omega by k, where this omega is angular frequency, which is 2 pi nu, and k is propagation constant, which is 2 pi by lambda. So if I substitute the values of omega and k in this equation, I get the result as 2 pi nu divided by 2 pi by lambda. So 2 pi gets cancelled, and therefore phase velocity Vp is equal to nu into lambda. If I substitute here value of nu from the Planck's quantum hypothesis as E is equal to h nu, so if I substitute the value of nu as nu is equal to E upon h, and if I substitute the value of nu, and if I substitute the value of de Broglie wavelength lambda as h upon mv, then cancelling out the mass and the rest of the terms, I will get the final expression for the phase velocity Vp as Vp is equal to c square by v, where this c is velocity of light and v is the particle velocity. So since this v, that is particle velocity, is very small as compared to this term, that is c square, this phase velocity is nearly equal to c square, it means that phase velocity is greater than velocity of light. So since as per this equation the phase velocity would always greater than the velocity of light, so according to the theory of relativity, the velocity of any particle v should always be less than the velocity of light c. So this result is thus unexpected and meaningless. It means that there is no such thing with which we can measure the phase velocity, that is the phase with which phase inside the wave packet it is traveling. But this complete wave packet, it moves with the velocity called as the group velocity vg, and we can show that mathematically, that this group velocity vg, which is defined as d omega by dk, is nearly it is equal to the particle velocity, which is v. And therefore sometimes the relation between phase velocity vp and group velocity vg can be written as vp is equal to c square by vg, because this v is the velocity of particle and it is equal to the group velocity vg. Then the second question, that what exactly is the thing that is waving in the matter wave. So like all the other waves which are known to us, such as say sound waves or light waves or mechanical waves, these are the waves which are known to us, and for each and every wave which is known to us, there is one particular quantity which always varies with space and time. So what is that physical quantity which varies with space and time in case of the matter waves? So this is the question. That is, for example, in case of electromagnetic waves, it is the electric field vector and the magnetic field vector which varies with space and time. So it is called as the wave variable or wave function for the electromagnetic waves. For sound waves, whenever a person speaks, he produces the sound, then he exerts the pressure with the help of his vocal cord on the air particles. So pressure is the wave variable which varies with space and time. In case of mechanical waves, displacement of the string, that varies with space and time. So each and every wave is characterized by a certain quantity which varies with space and time, and therefore here for matter waves also we define the term psi as the wave variable, which is also a function of position coordinate and time coordinate. So this psi represents the wave function for the position and time. Then since we do not know what is the exact form of this wave function psi is, because we do not know anything about the matter waves completely, and therefore this wave function psi, it should since it is originated from the probability waves, because they are all the probability waves, matter waves are the probability waves or guide waves, and therefore they should represent the particle in motion. So when we define the concept of wave packet, here we define that wherever amplitude inside the wave packet is maximum, probability of finding the position of particle is maximum. Wherever amplitude is minimum, probability of finding the position of particle is minimum. So by introducing the concept of wave packet, we have solved the problem of localization of particle in space. So we can say definitely that here in this wave packet, since the amplitude is very large, so the most probable position of the particle is this, while here the amplitude is minimum, it means that this is the less probable position of its existence. It doesn't mean that no particle, there is no particle which is present in this region, but the probability is minimum. So we have solved the problem of localization of particle in space by introducing the concept of wave packet. But so here this wave function psi, it should represent the probability of finding the position, and if I say that this wave function psi, it should represent the amplitude, then it also again create a problem that amplitude can be positive as well as negative. If amplitude is positive, then probability will be positive, then it is okay. But if amplitude is negative, then the probability will be negative, and negative probability is meaningless, and hence we cannot associate the amplitude of the matter wave by the wave function psi. Then this wave function psi, it can be a real term or it can be a complex term. If it is real, then it is okay, but if it is complex term, then then again the interpretation of this wave function psi, it becomes a difficult task. So it has been decided that there is no this wave function psi has no direct physical significance and it cannot be measured experimentally. So there is no physical significance of psi directly. Then what about it? How we can interpret what this wave function psi is? So we assume that this wave function psi, if it has the complex form such as psi is equal to a plus ib, such that this wave function psi has the complex form as psi is equal to a plus ib, where this a is the real part and this ib is the imaginary part or complex part. Then if we take the complex conjugate of this wave function as psi star, then this complex conjugate psi star will be equal to a minus ib, but if we take the product of these two, that is psi into psi star, that is the wave function psi multiplied by its complex conjugate psi star, then this product will always be equal to a square plus b square. So since this term psi into psi star, that is wave function multiplied by its complex conjugate, it is always a square term. So being a square term, it is always a positive term, and even if this wave function psi is complex, but if we take the product of psi with its complex conjugate, then it is always a positive as well as a real term. So since it is always a positive as well as real term, positive and real, and therefore some physical significance can be assigned to this product psi into psi star instead of this wave function psi. So psi itself do not have the physical significance, but this product psi into psi star, it has the physical significance. Then what is the interpretation of this mod of psi square? So Max Born in 1926, he gave the physical interpretation of this wave function, this product psi into psi star, that according to him, this product psi into psi star or mod of psi square, it represents the probability density. Probability density means probability of finding the particle in that particular region. It can be a region of small volume, infinitesimal small volume element, which is dV, such as dV which is equal to dx dy dz. So this is the probability density. So this probability density is directly proportional to this probability is directly proportional to mod of psi of xyz, because this is a function of position coordinate as well as time coordinate t, square over dV. So mod of psi square is known as the probability density, and psi is known as the probability amplitude. Now since the particle is certainly somewhere in the space, the probability will always yield a value which is equal to 1. So the integration, that is the total probability, will be if we integrate it from from minus infinity to infinity, we get the total probability of its existence in somewhere in the space. So integration from minus infinity to infinity mod of psi square over dv is equal to 1. This equation is known as the normalization condition. So the wave function psi is in general a complex function, but the probability must be real. Therefore psi is multiplied by its complex conjugate, that is psi star, and thus integration from minus infinity to infinity psi into psi star or mod of psi square over dv is equal to 1. Thus, although psi has no physical significance, but this mod of psi square gives the probability density of the particle, that is probability of finding the atomic particle in a particular region. Okay, so we end the lecture over here, and we'll continue this topic in this course, under the course that is quantum mechanics, in the next lecture. Thank you.